Hey 5th grade, welcome back to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces. So far in this series about creating three-dimensional depth and space on a flat sheet of paper, we have talked about silhouetted shapes, backlighting, and different ways that overlapping and size can create that distance. Today we're going to kind of put all of those ideas together and create a beautiful beach landscape or seascape or land seascape. Let's get started. So for the beach that we're going to draw today, you could draw with a pencil first and then add color and outlines and whatever. What I'm going to do is jump right in with color. Now, I have oil pastels that I'm going to use. If you don't have oil pastels, that's completely fine. You could do this project with markers or crayons. I don't think I would suggest markers. You could use colored pencils. I would suggest either crayons or colored pencils, something that you have the ability to blend or make lighter or darker, right? Like with crayons, you can push hard to make them dark and then be soft and gentle to make them lighter. If you use markers, you are probably going to run into a situation where you don't have the right color for what you're doing, right? Like you don't want to make all your sand completely brown, for example. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm using oil pastels. If you have oil pastels, they'll work real great for this. If not, use what you've got. Now, for starters, when we're drawing a landscape, we like to always start with the horizon. So I'm doing this with a gray first because I can kind of go over that. I know there's going to be some overlapping going on. I won't be able to erase my oil pastels if I have some overlapping happening, but I know that with this gray I can kind of color over it if I need to. All right, so that's the horizon. That's where the ocean is going to meet the sky. Then what I'm going to do is draw some sand dunes, but what I'm going to do is have one on each side, but I don't want... Here's my plan. Let me just kind of feel through my plan. I want to have sand dunes on both sides and a path leading towards the beach, towards the shore, towards the ocean. But I don't want that path to be right in the middle of the picture. I want it to be off to one side or the other because that kind of helps to, it's what we call the rule of thirds. When things are completely centered, it gets kind of boring. When things are a little off to the side and not quite symmetrical, then there's more variety and things like that. So what I'm going to do here is kind of about here is where I'm going to want the sun to be shining down onto the ocean, and then there's going to be a path leading right to where that light is. And so if that's where that is, then over here there's going to be a sand dune, and then on the other side there's going to be another sand dune, okay? And then between the bottom of the sand dune and the horizon, there's going to be the shore. So everything from here down, this is all sand, and then these sand dunes are probably going to have some, reeds or some kind of plants on them, and then there's going to be more sand, and then there's going to be the water, and then there's going to be the sky. So it's not quite a sunset here. The sun is low, but it's not setting yet. Okay, and notice that I didn't make a ginormous sun. The sun is going to be pretty small, just based on the perspective of where you're looking. I mean, unless you have like a zoom lens on a camera, but that's not what we're drawing. Now, one of the reasons, like I said before, that I don't want to use markers is because, like, if I use the brown marker to color in the sand, that's not going to look like sand, is it? So with oil pastels, I have different colors. I can use this sort of peachy, I guess it's called pale orange, but it looks pretty peachy. I can mix that with little dots of brown, maybe some little dots of gray, some little dots of black, whatever, maybe even some yellow mixed in. We'll talk about that here in just a second. First, before I do that, I want to keep sort of lightly figuring out where things are going to be. I want to have, since there's going to be a path leading towards the ocean, maybe there's going to be a fence on both sides, kind of holding the sand dunes, not holding the sand dunes, but stopping people from, you know, a lot of times when you go to the beach, there's like fences that say, do not cross this fence because there's turtles over there and you don't want to mess with the wildlife kind of things. So I'm going to have a fence on both sides, and that fence is going to create leading lines that point us towards the beach. Now, what I'm going to do is start, I guess, I could start in the distance or I could start close and work my way out. Either way, what I'm going to do is have some fence posts. So maybe here I'll have a fence post, just a rectangle. Okay, I can add more detail to it later. Now, if there's another fence post closer to me, the bottom of it is gonna be lower down and it's gonna be taller, right? Okay, so here's the next fence post. And then the next one is going to be even closer, and so the bottom of it is going to be even further down. It's going to go off the bottom of my page. And it'll be a little bigger because it's closer to me, right? So you can see how these fence posts look like they're getting farther away. All right. I'll do the same thing on this side. Maybe I'll only see two of them over here. There should be one the same distance away as that one, but on the other side. So it'll be the same size as this, but on the other side. So I'll mark where the bottom of that is. Now this one, maybe I want a broken fence post. You know, a lot of times when you go to the beach, things get weathered. Things are, you know, when hurricanes come through, the fences aren't always completely straight anymore. Now level with the bottom of this, I'll have my next fence post. And it should be as tall as that one. Do I want this one to be broken too? I'm gonna let this one be still solid. But now the lines, you know, for the posts, these are the posts, the rails going from post to post. Those need to be put in next. And here where it's a broken fence, I need to consider that the posts aren't the only part that's broken. The rails are gonna be broken too. So maybe this bottom rail is fine. So like there's a rail going from that fence post to the bottom part of that fence post. But then where the top here is, maybe it's broken into two pieces. So there's like this part, and then this part could be like hanging from the top of that fence post. Does that make sense? Let me show you what it would look like if it wasn't broken, and maybe that'll make more sense. So you see how it's just a diagonal from the bottom middle to the bottom middle, and it overlaps behind this fence post. And then from the top to the top, there's another rail, right? And so that's what it would look like if it wasn't broken. If you don't want to do it broken, you don't have to do it broken. Like that might be a little too complicated. I'm sorry if I'm confusing you. Anyway, so we want to follow that same line for the next rails here. Now, a couple of weeks ago we talked about, or maybe it wasn't last week, it was 2 weeks ago. We talked about perspective. We talked about point perspective and how lines that are moving away from us will move towards a certain point, right? Notice how I've got these extra rails coming, like you can imagine there's another fence post off the edge of the page. I'll do the same thing over here, and then we'll take a look at where the vanishing point is in this picture. Because I haven't drawn a vanishing point, but there is one. If we look at where do these lines point, right here. Now, this is wrong. When you're actually creating, like if you're trying to make it look realistic and lifelike, the vanishing point should always be at the horizon. Anytime you have things that are parallel to each other moving away from you into the distance, the vanishing point should always be at the horizon. But I didn't put it at the horizon. If you look at where these lines point, they point to here. That's because sometimes we do something wrong in order to direct the viewer's eyes. And you can, once you know the rules, you can break the rules, right? If you know how to break them. So the rule is the vanishing point should always be at the horizon, but I've broken it and moved it down to here. This isn't the horizon. Why did I break that rule? Because I want to lead your eyes to the beach, not to the horizon. So I wanted these lines to point towards the water, not towards the horizon, okay? So if I wanted to direct your attention to the sun, then I would have brought those down like this and had those lines point towards the sun. If I wanted to bring your attention to the horizon, then I would have had those lines point towards the horizon. I wanted to lead your eyes to the water, so I pointed this to the water. That's a trick you can use. I think now I've pretty much got everything placed where I want it to be. Now it's time to start coloring it in. So like I was saying before, one of the reasons why I'm using oil pastels is because I can mix these colors together. So what I'm going to do is start with just a sort of base color. Oil pastels are wonderful because you can move them around quite a bit. If you're using oil pastels, your hands will get quite messy. Yeah, that's just something you're going to have to deal with. One way to deal with that is to hold the pastels by the paper instead of by, don't take the paper off unless you have to. Really though, just deal with it. Now this color by itself, you just clean your hands when you're done, right? So anyway, this color by itself is it's not really sandy. It's peachy, not really sandy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix some other colors into it. I'm going to mix some brown into it. I'm going to mix maybe some yellow into it. And this is where the oil pastels are really, really going to shine. But I'm going to start with sort of a base layer and just get this color to fill most of the hill. Notice there's overlapping here, right? The fence posts are in front. I'm coloring the hill behind, the sand dune behind the fence posts. So I'm not coloring the fence posts themselves. I'm coloring the space between the fence posts and the space between the fence rails, but I'm not coloring the fence posts and I'm not coloring the fence rails. We will come back to those later. And then also the space under the fence posts and under the fence rails. Now, I will eventually color all the way across and get, all the sandy area, but in the interest of showing you how we're going to be blending these colors, I'm going to start by just picking a couple of colors that I want to work with here, maybe even some white for some highlights. And again, if you have crayons, you can do this with crayons too. You just have to, or colored pencils, you can do this with those things too. You just have to work in layers. Don't push down very hard. Work in layers, and then and it'll work with those too. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start, before I even think about texture, I'm going to think about shadows. The light is shining onto the top here, so maybe there's going to be some yellow on the highlight at the top of this sand dune where the light is shining directly onto that face of the sand dune. And then this side is going to be in shadow. So I'm not using the black and white for my shadows and highlights, at least not yet. I might use those to brighten up or darken certain areas if needed. But this whole side of the sand dune is going to be darker. I'm using a brown to darken it. And again, notice that oil pastels are great for just coloring right on top of each other, but also for blending. So I'm going to be able to sort of mix that color with the other colors that are already on the page. All right. So right now I'm just blocking in highlights and shadows. And again, what I would normally do is color all the sand one base color and do all of the highlights and shadows, and then come back in and do all of the texture and final blending and all that. But I'm going to focus on one hill here for now, just to kind of show you the steps. Now, what I'm doing here with the gray is just kind of neutralizing some of the oranginess of the peach, the light orange. This color, like I said, it's called pale orange. It's a little too vibrant. I don't want my sand to be quite that colorful, so I'm just putting a little bit of gray in here just to neutralize that a little bit, and not too much. Then I want to come in and start thinking about texture. So there's going to be a lot of dots. Maybe I need to do blending first. So, Testaroonie. So to blend my colors, that's where I want to start actually applying a little bit of pressure and working. What I'm going to do is work in kind of small circles. And so what I'm doing is I'm taking whatever oil pastel I want my main color to be, and I'm using that to just rub together with the colors that are already there. And I'm applying a little bit of pressure, not too much pressure, just a little bit. After you've blended, you can always go back, like I said, and you can add more. You can make it darker if you need to. You can color on top. So you don't, like, this is not the final step by any means. If it doesn't turn out quite the way you want it, then you can always go back and do more with it. But here I'm just trying to make it like, because where I haven't blended it, there's like lines of color in there. And I'm just working in little circles to kind of get rid of those lines and make the color more saturated so that you're not seeing like little white gaps and things like that. Okay? And let's get that whole hill done this way. Just little circles. It takes time, but it's worth it. Now, as I've done this shadow over here, what I'm immediately noticing is that by blending it with this pale orange color or the peachy color, it has made the color a lot lighter, especially on that shadow. It made that shadow color a lot lighter. I am going to need to go back and darken that up a little bit more. That's not dark enough for what I was wanting. I wanted a little bit more contrast. Not too much more contrast because, you know, it's not like nighttime, so it's not going to be like super dark. The sun is still up, and it's not even a sunset, so it's not going to be a silhouette either. It's not like I'm just going to have black hills. But I do want the shadowed side to be a little bit darker than that. So I will come back and add a little bit of darkness to that here in just a little bit. But first, I'm just going to finish up with this layer. Again, we're working in layers. And like I said before, this works with crayons or colored pencils too. It's pretty much the same method. Oil pastels just have much more ability to layer, to blend on top of each other even after you have pushed hard. With colored pencils or crayons, once you push hard to do some blending, it's kind of hard to add more on top. So if you're using colored pencils or crayons, then you want to take your time with those layers and don't push down until you're really sure that the color is what you want. Anyway, I think that's fairly good on the blending for now. I want to go back and do a little bit of blending with my brown to darken up the shadowed side over here. And I don't want to darken up the whole shadowed side. I just want to darken enough. And I think that right there is going to be pretty good. And now I'm going back in with my peach to just kind of blend that transition area between the different levels of the shadow, between the lighter shadow and the darker shadow. All right, so now I'm ready for some texture. I'm ready to apply texture. And for texture, what I'm going to do, you know, since this is sand, I'm just going to start adding dots. Now, right away, those black dots are way too dark. Way too dark. But I can always, like I said, I can always go back over and kind of blend those in. Little tight circles. Blend that with my color, you know, with my peachy color, and it'll blend those things in. So we're going to do multiple layers of this. Dots, just tapping gently. You don't want to bang it, you want to tap gently. If you want to be very precise, you can, but for something like sand, it's like, why would you want to be precise? It's like, that's not what sand looks like. It's not precise. So I'm just kind of randomly tapping out some brown, some gray, some black, maybe add some yellow. It's not gonna show much, but it's one of those, it's like a little bit makes a big difference, okay? And then, again, go back in on top and blend that through. Now, if you want an area to look darker, use more of the black and brown and less of the yellow in your texture. If you want an area to look lighter, use more yellow and white dots and maybe even blend it with the white. Like I could blend this highlighted area with my white to make it even paler, right? Anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and just finish off all of the sand with my sandy shading and texturing, and then come back and talk to you guys about the water, the sky, those kinds of things once I'm done with the sand. So I think that's enough for my sand for now. I am gonna come back and use some green to make some plants on those sand dunes, but not quite yet. I think my next step is gonna be these fence posts. And what I wanna do with the fence posts, my original thought was to have them be white, like they had been whitewashed or painted white. But I'm thinking brown would go better. So I'm gonna do like kind of natural wood, dark wood, brown. Might darken some things up with the black. I'm thinking of going for a dark black, like dark brown wood for this fence. So again, just like I did with the sand, I'm gonna start with a base color where I'm just coloring with the brown. That's it, just coloring with the brown. I'm just gonna color the whole thing, the whole fence. Fence posts, fence rails, just getting a base layer of color with the brown. Then when I'm done coloring in the fence posts and the fence rails, I'm gonna go back in with maybe black and white to create shadows and highlights. I usually don't use black and white for highlights and shadows. I usually try to match the color of the light for the highlights. So like if it's a yellow sunshine, then I would use yellow highlights. But I think for this brown, since it's already so neutral, it might be okay for me to just use black and white for the highlights and shadows. Anyway, so I've got a base color of brown here. You can see that I haven't colored it completely all the way, like there's little white gaps that didn't get filled in. I haven't been pushing hard. That's because I want to be able to blend in more of my highlight and shadow colors. I'm gonna go ahead and test my yellow on the brown. I'm not thinking that it's gonna work super well. I mean, it lightens it a little bit, but I think the white is gonna work better for highlights. So the sunlight is shining on this side of the fence, the inside of the fence. So this side of the fence is gonna be lighter, Now, when I do that, it is kind of making it match too much with the sand, so I am going to be going back over that with the brown. But then this side of the fence post, right, there's like, the fence post is three-dimensional, so it's going to have like a light side and a dark side. And so this side is in shadow. So I'm going over it with the black. Now the black is probably too much. I maybe probably should have just used like my blue for the shadows side. But we'll see. When I go back and mix brown in on top of that, it's actually not too bad. I mean, it is probably darker than it should have been, but maybe a blue would have been a better idea. Again, I usually like to use color in my shadows instead of black, and I usually like to use color in my highlights instead of white. But black and white will, that seems to be doing all right. All right, and so then I am darkening up. The highlighted side doesn't need to be like pure white, right? Like, it's still a brown fence. So I'm going back with the brown to mix into the white that I put on top. And there we go. So that's like a three-dimensional fence post with the light shining onto this side and this side being in shadow. I'm going to do that for my other fence posts, and then for the fence rails, the light is going to be shining on the top side and the underside is going to be dark. I'm going to do the same thing on this side too. Where the fence posts are broken, we're just going to have to think about, well, which way is the light shining onto it? But it's the same concept all the way around. So yeah, I'm really happy with the way that those highlights and shadows turned out. Now that fence looks three-dimensional. All I did was, and I can show this kind of on a separate paper here, all I did for each fence post, like if it was a fence post like this, all I did was just cut it in half, make half of it light, where the light was shining, and then make the other half dark. That's all I did. Maybe a little bit of angling at the top to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional there, but even at the bottom I didn't bother doing that. So it's just splitting it in half. Wherever the light's shining, make it light. Wherever the light's not shining, make it dark. That's all there is to it. For the water, let's talk about the water. It's going to be mostly reflecting the sky, right? So if we've got a bright yellow sun, and then a bright blue sky, maybe I'm going to have the blue blend into a slightly darker blue at the top. But it's mostly just going to be, as a matter of fact, it might even be kind of whitish. I might have clouds. How do I want to handle that? Maybe I do want to have clouds. I don't know. I think I'm going to have a clear sky. But I'm going to want even lighter than this around the sun. It's going to be really, really bright. So I'm not pushing as hard as I can with this blue as I'm making the sky here. Just like everything else, I'm layering my colors. A lot of times I have students who want to just put one color down and then say they're done. And maybe, you know, in kindergarten, first grade, for younger kids, that's kind of normal, that's kind of understandable. You're, you know, but there comes a point where it's like you know that it's going to take more than that, right? It's going to be more involved. It's going to take more time. It's going to take more effort. And if you really want top-notch, good results that you can be proud of, you're going to have to go the next step, go the distance. You see what I did there? We're talking about distance, creating depth. Go the distance. I thought it was funny. Anyway, the point here is every single part of this picture, I'm not just coloring one color and then saying I'm done. I'm making layers, I'm going back in to add highlights and shadows, and if you really want to get the best results from anything that you do, whether it's art, whether it's a math test, whether it's a job, whether it's, you know, making your parents happy when you do your chores at home, whatever it is you're doing, put your all into it. Don't just do the minimum and then say, all right, I'm done. I can give up. I can give it up now. I can go move on and do the other thing, whatever, whatever it is. Give it your all. Take your time. Do your best. Not everything in life is going to take a lot of time, but the mantra of take your time and do your best is a good mantra to have, because most times, if you're really doing your best work, it's going to take more time than if you weren't doing your best work. Now, my white pastel has some brown on it. I don't want that brown mixing in with my sky blue, but I do want to lighten the sky down here at the bottom. So how do I do that? Well, I could use my fingers to kind of rub that stuff off, but then it's going to get all over my fingers and it's going to be smudgy all over everything. I could use a separate, I've got paper here on my desk, or I could use the back of my paper, but just kind of rub the color off. A lot of times I will, when I'm using oil pastels, I will keep a separate sheet of paper handy just so that I can rub my whites. Other colors that's important too. It's really important with yellow a lot of times to do that too, just to get the other colors off of it, so that when you're mixing it with a new color, you're not blending in colors that you didn't intend to blend. So anyway, I've just cleaned off my white so that I can blend it in with some of the blue down here. And notice that here, as I am putting the finishing touches on the sky, I'm always moving in horizontal motions. Well, I mean, I've turned the paper, but my pastels are always moving side to side relative to the picture. I'm not going up and down at the edges. Even at the edges, I was moving side to side. Now I've turned the paper because it's easier for me to go this way, but the pastel that I'm using is always moving that direction. Also, it's always moving in these small movements. If you try to color the whole thing really fast, it ain't gonna work. It ain't gonna, you need more control than that. No matter what you're using, whether it's crayons, colored pencils, pastels, give yourself the freedom to take your time on it, like I've said before, and work in one area at a time. Now, what you notice by doing this, by working in one area at a time, and going in small movements, what you notice is it's getting a nice sort of texture to the sky. It's not all one solid color, and that's a good thing. It's giving some variety, it's giving some cloudiness, some wispiness, it's giving some, like if it was all just one solid color of blue, that was all the same blue, especially if it had all these white gaps, like if you're not pushing hard enough, then it would look really dull and boring. But by filling it all the way with just these small movements, I'm pushing pretty hard to blend in the colors that are down on the page, but I'm making these really small movements, and it's making that interesting, intricate texture that makes it look really beautiful. I love the way that turned out. Now my sun, I did go a little over the edge, so I'm gonna just kind of round that off a bit right here. Now it's time for the water. The water is going to reflect the sky, which means, importantly, there's going to be sunlight reflecting off of waves coming straight down from there. Now it's tempting to just color the water blue, just like it's tempting to just color the sky blue, but no, we're gonna, instead of coloring it, we're gonna start with some texture. Now, because the shore here is so far away, we're not going to actually really be able to make out individual waves, but we can get the texture of a lot of waves by just making a bunch of horizontal strokes. Okay, so I've used the light blue for that. I'm going to use also the dark blue for some of that. And again, I will be coming back in and blending over those. I want the middle here to be nice and bright, because that's going to be where the sun is reflecting off the water. So I'll get some of my dark blue on the outer sides, but not here in the underneath the sun. It's not really the middle, is it? Okay. I do have this tiny little piece back here behind the hill where I can see, behind the sand dune, where I can see a little bit of water there. I am just going to kind of give a little bit of a hint that there is water there. I'm really not seeing much. But it needs to clearly be different from the sky, right? Anyway, coming back into here underneath the sun, I want the tops of those waves to be reflecting that sunlight. So I'm going to put in some yellow horizontal strokes and some white horizontal strokes. And let's see, I think, again, for most of the sky, I used a white to blend most of the sky. And I think I'm going to do something similar with the water, although I do want to try to add in a little bit of greeniness, because, I mean, it is the ocean we're talking about here. So maybe a little bit of that. And why not? A little spots of red that will just mix with the blue and make it a little purpley. That'll just kind of help darken things away from the sunlight area. A little bit, maybe. Anyway, I'm just kind of playing around with color. I could put some brown into the ocean, even some black and white if I wanted to. Now, with oil pastels, I have gotten down to the paper. If I'm going to peel off the paper, I don't want to peel all the paper off. I want to be very careful to only peel a little bit. That way, I can still hold it on the paper, and I'm not going to get my hands all covered in oily, gunky goop. All right. Well, I think that is enough of that, and now I'm just going to do the blending with the white. Although, right here at the horizon under the sun, I do need a little bit more of an outline right across the horizon. Yeah. Okay. Blending with the white. Again, always horizontal. Always in horizontal movements for the sky and for the water. Because those are elements that will appear horizontal. Okay. Where it meets with the sand. Over here, it's behind my hill, so I really want a clean, solid outline of my hill there. But here where it just washes up onto the shore, this is another reason why I chose to use oil pastels for this. Pastels are movable, so as I'm blending this color, it's really moving color around, and I can pull that down on top of the sandy area, and it's really going to help give that look like the sand is wet right there at the shore. So I'm just blending over all of these colors that I've put into the water, and then right here at the shore, instead of trying to just leave it as a nice, solid, still line, whoops, I overdid that. I'm pulling that color, because there's color on this pastel that was picked up by doing the blending. I'm just pulling some of that down onto the sand and letting it overlap, letting it cover up some. And that helps to give it, you know, the look like the sand is wet and like the ocean is actually lapping up onto the beach. But then right here at the edge of my sand dune, I want a nice, clean, solid, smooth outline. And I can always go back if I accidentally go over that line. I can always go back in with my peachy color and kind of re-flesh out that line if I accidentally muss it up too badly. I think I'll do a little bit more of that over here where it kind of turned a little green, mixing with the yellow at the top of the hill. There we go. I could leave this as it is and call it done. Or I could go back in and try to add some little reeds, some little plants. It's totally, there's totally up to you. You decide how far to embellish, how far to go with these things. And just as a finishing touch, I want to put a little bit more yellow on the sand right here under the sun and a little bit more yellow on the water right here under the sun, just to kind of pull that out and really make the eyes pop to those locations. Because ideally, everything in this picture is designed to pull your eyes down this path, through the path, and towards the beach, right? Time to soak up the rays. That's it for today's beach lesson. As we continue our theme about creating depth on a flat sheet of paper, we're going to continue making more landscapes over the next couple of weeks. Different styles of landscapes with different things in them so that we can understand how all of these ideas work together. Next week, we are specifically going to be focusing on a winding river going through some woods into some mountains. I can't wait to see you then.